Over the past week, I have seen every Quentin Tarantino movie. Now, I haven't watched every second of film he's ever written or directed, but I've seen the 8 movies that are generally considered to be his movies. I've been a fan of his for some time now, and I have to admit that this wasn't my first viewing for any of them. But this time, I watched them all very closely, and having watched them all in such a short period of time, I was able to properly compare each one and note many similarities and differences between them. Before I get into ranking them, let me tell you some things that stood out to me. Mr. Tarantino likes to mess with timelines. It's pretty common for you to know the effect or the outcome of what happened, but be clueless as to the cause or how it happened. Sometimes it feels like he wrote the script in the traditional way and then just shuffled some papers around. He reuses the same actors in different movies, including himself, many times in completely different roles. Most of the time I'd say it works out much better than I would have expected. The main character is almost always an anti-hero. You're rooting for them to win, but they're not a good or moral person. He's not afraid to use a narrator. In the filmmaking community, these are usually thought to be a lazy way of storytelling. The story should be told through the dialogue and not just laid out for the viewer, but he seems to make it work perfectly. Doesn't even seem necessary in some cases. Same goes for showing text on screen. If you're a musician, I recommend you lobby to get your song played in one of his movies. His scenes make every song sound amazing. In the majority of his movies, there's a scene where someone gets shot completely unexpectedly. If you hadn't seen the movie before, there is no way you would ever see these moments coming. He uses similar themes and motivations. For instance, in 2 different movies, a character bargains with someone not to shoot them because they have a baby. His last 2 movies have featured bounty hunting pretty heavily. And also, you could expect there to be a briefcase or a bag or something along those lines that's very important to the characters. A big thing that I really like is that he makes the characters talk about everyday things, some of which you would expect a stand-up comedian to talk about. Things like whether or not you should tip in a restaurant, what they call a quarter pounder in Europe, or how Superman disguises himself as a human while most other superheroes the costume is the disguise. He takes these conversations and somehow transitions them into something that's important to the plot. Possibly my biggest observation about Quentin Tarantino movies is that they always have the same feeling. In early years, he focused on gangster, crime type genres. The middle years were more action-based. Recently, his last 3 movies have all been historical, even somewhat political pieces. But through all these changes, all the movies have very similar moods. Like how I can identify a Metallica song after hearing it for just a few seconds, I could detect when I'm watching a Tarantino movie after watching it for just a few minutes. Now, obviously this ranking is completely just my own opinion, but I'm confident with my choices. So let's get started with the ranking. In the number 8 spot, Death Proof. I don't expect to get much argument with this one. It's broken into 2 separate stories with one character in common. Stuntman Mike is a great character. He basically murders people with his car, but in the first half, you don't know that yet, but you suspect something. The first half is filled with great scenes where the audience is wondering whether or not they should trust him. All the circumstances say no, but Stuntman Mike is so convincing you don't know what to make of him. The reason this movie is last on my list is Stuntman Mike isn't even in most of the movie. Most of it is just these groups of women talking about nonsense, which I know I said I liked, but not here. Tarantino must have been off his game, because this is not clever conversation. It was mostly just meaningless. I disliked almost every character. They mostly just annoyed me and seemed phony. In defense of it, it was supposed to be like one of those 1970s era B movies. I'm not too familiar with those, and I got the sense that I would better appreciate this movie if I were. This is the only movie on the list that I would actually not recommend to most people. Number 7 is Jackie Brown. This is what I consider the forgotten Tarantino movie. I always forget this one is part of his collection. I think it's because it lacks that feeling I spoke about earlier. It still has it, just less than the others. It's about a flight attendant attempting to smuggle money into the United States from Mexico. It's really more complicated, but I'm going to leave it at that. I like all the characters, there's fantastic casting in the female lead, which is important for this movie to work. The way he messes with the timeline in this one is by showing the final sequence 3 times from 3 different perspectives. My biggest issue is that it's just not memorable. There's no great scenes to recall, just nothing that sticks with you after watching it. Number 6 is Kill Bill, Volumes 1 and 2. These are usually categorized as combining into a single movie, and I don't disagree with that. It's all one long story, and a simple story. Most of his movies are complex, with a number of equally important characters. Kill Bill is around 4 hours of a simple story. A woman nearly gets murdered by Bill and his gang, and now she's on a mission to kill Bill and his gang. It uses excessive sound effects. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it stands out. The tone of the movie is very heavy. With the exception of the final sequence with Bill, there's not much of that mundane conversation that I like to hear. I wasn't crazy about the casting of the main character. Kill Bill is so heavily based on this one character, it was probably the one most important thing when putting it together. I'd rate her maybe an 8 or 9 out of 10, but a 10 out of 10 would have brought this to a new level. With all that being said, it's still worth the 4 hours of your time. Really unique concepts throughout it, really cool fight sequences, just a bunch of mindless fun, which is what you would generally want from an action movie. Number 5 is The Hateful Eight. It's set just after the Civil War. A group of travelers are hindered by a blizzard and are stranded in Minnie's haberdashery. It has everything you would want from a Tarantino movie. Intense moments, witty conversations, the whole time you're trying to put together what's going on. You learn a little bit more every so often, but don't see the full picture until he wants you to. My biggest complaint is that it relies so much on the viewer not knowing what's going on. Once you see the movie and learn it all, it's much less interesting when you watch it the second time. Number 4 is Django Unchained. This sounds like a strange summary, but a slave is freed by a white guy and teams up with him in a bounty hunting business. Later on, they construct a plan to free the slave's wife, Broomhilda, from a plantation owner. It's a ridiculous plot, but as a viewer, you're buying every second of it. Jamie Foxx plays a very angry character, the type of character you're used to seeing Sam Jackson play. It's a view of slavery that I haven't yet seen. The point of view of someone that's been recently freed and now has the opportunity to converse with a plantation owner as an equal. There's racial messages, political messages, but delivered in a way where you don't even realize they're being delivered. Number 3 is Reservoir Dogs. A robbery has gone wrong, and now the group of robbers has to figure out why. They suspect someone informed the cops about it, but they don't know who. The structure of this movie is unlike most things you've seen before. The movie takes place right after the robbery, and we get to see little bits from before and during the robbery throughout the movie. There's a famous scene where Mr. Blonde has a cop tied to a chair and then goes out to his car to grab a can of gasoline. The transitions here are great because the change in environment makes you realize the heavy mood he's created in the warehouse, and that's something you can really respect when you watch it. Reservoir Dogs has interesting conversations all over it. It opens with a great scene of everyone talking in a restaurant. Later, Mr. Pink argues about the name he's been assigned for the mission. Mr. Orange tells a very vivid story about himself and some cops in a bathroom. I don't know what there is to dislike about this movie. Number 2 is Inglorious Bastards. It's World War II, and all the Nazis, including Hitler, are going to be at a big movie premiere. There's multiple people that see this as a great opportunity to kill them all. I don't want to describe the opening scene and ruin it for everyone, but it's probably my favorite scene of any of these movies. And there's 2 or 3 other scenes that rank highly on that list as well. I said Jackie Brown wasn't memorable. Well, this one is the opposite, which I guess would be memorable. When I watched it this week, it was my first time since around the time it came out 8 years ago, and I remember just about every scene. But when you step back and look at the entire movie, maybe some of the scenes didn't contribute to the overall movie as much as you would have hoped. With that being said, I wouldn't change a thing about it. Number 1, of course, is Pulp Fiction. I would have liked to put something unexpected in the number 1 spot, but I just can't do it. Pulp Fiction is my favorite Tarantino movie, high on my list on all-time favorite movies. I'd estimate I'd seen it at least 5 times at this point. I don't even want to talk about it much because it's all been said before. Multiple stories going on at the same time, all tying together perfectly. It's so complicated, I can't even attempt to explain the plot. There's weird little moments that make you think. It's filled with big name actors playing the parts that you want to see them play. Every second is just entertaining. Driving in a car, dancing, walking to an apartment. You would think some of these things are just necessary to progress the story, but every scene is the focus. There's not a moment you should look away, nor would you want to. I want to put a challenge out there for anybody watching this. Go down to the comments, and within 20 words, which should be about a sentence or two, try to give a summary of Pulp Fiction. I tried doing this, and couldn't come up with anything that properly reflected the movie. And while you're down there in the comments, let me know what you think about these movies. I recommend you see them all, with the exception of Death Proof. You could steer clear of that one. Steer, cause it's a car? Okay. But the other 7, go watch them right now, especially Pulp Fiction. If you haven't seen that, you're in for a treat. You may even want to watch it a second time so you can be sure you catch everything. And you probably won't. I'm at 5+ viewings and I haven't caught everything yet. There's 8 movies here, and I want to hear your thoughts about some or all of them. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.